Hi, I'm Deb Heatherly with Deb's Cats and Quilts, and today I'd like to show you my new Creative Grid Strippy Stars tool. The Strippy Stars tool makes 8 different sizes of floating star blocks and variations, all from squares and strips. Because it's made by Creative Grids, it's got that famous grip on the back. Marking your sewing line is a snap. All 8 sizes tell you what size square, what size strip you're going to need, and what size that square is going to finish at. It makes 3-inch finished squares like this one, all the way up to a 13.5-inch finished square. Because your star points float, you never have to worry about cutting your star points off when you sew them into your quilt. And because they're made with squares and strips, they're fast, fun, and easy. Let me show you how it works. For every star block, you're going to need 9 squares. 4 corner squares, a center square, and 4 squares that are going to become the foundation for your Strippy Stars star points. Today I'm going to use the 4.5-inch size. I find the 4.5-inch mark on my Strippy Stars tool and place it so that that line is just at the edge of my square. I'm going to use a fine point pen or pencil that does not iron away to mark my sewing lines. That grip held it in place, not a problem. You'll notice when I mark my sewing line that the V does not come all the way to the bottom of the square. That's because this section will eventually become my 1/4-inch seam allowance for sewing my star points to my block. Notice that my sewing line did not go into the top corners. That's part of the floating process, and that's going to happen on every size but the itty-bitty 1.5. Does that mean the 1.5 doesn't float? No, it still floats. Because of the angle and the engineering of the tool, you're going to have floating stars in all 8 sizes. When I'm ready to start sewing, I grab a strip. Now remember, I told you that this told you what size strip you needed for each size square. These are minimum strip requirements. So although it tells me that I'm going to use a 2.5-inch strip with my 4.5-inch square, if I have 3-inch strips left from another project, I can use those and I don't need to trim them down first. I'll trim them during the Strippy Star process. So here's my strip. I'm going to use a 1/4-inch foot on my machine, even though I have a sewing line. If I use the 1/4-inch foot, I have a great visual for aligning my sewing line, and I like a 1/4-inch foot that does not have a flange on the side. I like to start my strip into my machine, sewing a 1/4-inch from the edge. The first time I sew my squares to my strip, the point of the V points at me, and the top of the square tilts to the left. I place my square on my strip so that my right-hand sewing line is 1/4 inch from the edge of my strip, and I sew through my square. When I get to the bottom of the V, I continue at the same angle I was sewing and grab another square. I'm going to leave just enough room to cut these apart after I've sewn through my squares. And I keep sewing and sewing and sewing till I run out of strip. Now if I'm making a lot of these, I'm going to grab another strip and chain piece it right in and keep adding squares. Once I've filled up my strip, I could take it to my ironing board just like this, but I like to rough cut my squares apart, and I just normally take my scissors and cut right through here. Take it to my ironing board and make sure that I lay it flat. I don't ever want to fold over my square. I want to keep it flat. I like to set my seams and press this back over the edge of my square. Then it's time to trim. I'm going to turn it over, and my favorite tool to trim with is the new itty-bitty 8s. Because of the grip on this tool, trimming is not a problem. I'm going to lay it on my original square and trim anything that extends beyond that square. Once I do, I have half my star point. Now it's time to grab another strip, and I'm going to take my single star points. This time, the point of the V points away from me, and the top of my square will tilt to the right. Again, I start my strip into my machine, a 1/4 inch from the edge, and begin to place my squares, sewing all the way through the sewing line and continuing to my next square until I've filled up my strip. Once again, use your rotary cutter or your scissors and just cut between your squares. Take them to your ironing board. Again, keep your square flat at all times. Set your seams and press this piece back over the edge of your square. Once again, grab your itty bitty 8s or your CGR6, place it right on your square and trim away anything that extends beyond your original square. Once you do, there's your star point. Your 1/4 inch seam allowance is right here. Notice how your threads will cross. And notice that our points are not coming all the way to the edge. Let's go back to our original star. Your 4.5 inch squares will give you a 12.5 inch unfinished block and a 12 inch finished star block. When you're sewing your star points to the center of your square, sew from the back side so that you can see where those threads crossed and have a perfect valley in between your star points every time. Also, notice that as I went along, I did not cut this layer out. This is a foundation piecing technique, and by leaving that in, it just makes your star points more stable. I hope you'll have fun with the new Creative Grid Strippy Stars tool, and you can ask for it and the companion book, Strippy Stars, at your local quilt shop. Until next time, happy stitching.